the afternoon work session for the Board of Trustees of the Alabama Community College System. Everyone's been presented with an agenda all the board members have prior to this meeting, and we will get started. I'll turn this over to Chancellor Mark Heinrich.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would like to take just a moment once again to express our appreciation to Dr. Ward and his staff for, again, a marvelous day thus far. Dr. Ward, I know you're here someplace. There you are in the back. I mean, everything has been just perfect, and please know how grateful we are to you for.
My faculty have been really pulled this together. They allowed me to walk out. It should be really
Good. Well, great. Well, thank you. I'd also like to recognize two other individuals. First, I think most of you know Jared White. Jared has been our educational liaison to the governor's office for how many years? Has it been 2 years, Jared?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half? Okay. Any event, he's been promoted. I think that's an accurate description. He is now the Senate liaison with the governor's office. And so we certainly congratulate you and wish you well on that task, but we're not going to let you get too far away. So congratulations. And his replacement is Christian Beecraft, who is seated right next to him. Christian will be our new educational liaison with the governor's office, and so we certainly welcome you and look forward to working with you. So thanks to both of you.
Chancellor, I'd like to add, Jared assumed his position as the governor's education advisor about the same time that I was appointed to the State Board of Education. So Jared and I have learned together. And we from time to time commiserated and shared that we wish we had a couple of do-overs. But we learned by some hard knocks and have had some great experiences. And I cannot say enough on the great job that Jared has done, the communication that he has provided for between the two-year system and the governor's office and the Board of Education and the governor's office, K-12 and the governor's office. It's just been great. And Jared, thank you for what you've done. Excited about what you're going to do ahead. And Christian, we welcome you and just look forward to working with you the same way we did with Jared. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's move on with the proposed action items for our November 12th board meeting. And you should have, I think you all have the agenda before you. We have one under fiscal, and who is going to be, right, there's Jake. Sure, maybe if you could but do use the microphone if you would. You would kind of walk us through that one, Jane.
Okay. J.F. Drake State Community and Technical College is requesting to refund their 2003 bond. The original issue amount was almost $4.4 million. The current balance, outstanding balance, is 1.9. They actually have a debt reserve fund and a bond reserve fund that they will be able to liquidate and apply to the principal, which will actually reduce the amount that they'll borrow to 1.6, as you see there in the action item. This is a cost savings of almost $100,000. And that is the interest savings over the remaining life of the bond. But because of the actual liquidation of the two reserve funds, they'll see about a $50,000 a year savings on their debt service payment. So that will be very helpful for their bottom line. And the overall net savings in relation to the two bond reserve funds and the total interest that will be saved is over, I think it's like $446,000 over the remaining life of the bond. So this is a good move for the college.
Very good.
Are there any questions?
Any questions for Jane?
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Our next four items are in legal. And David, are you going to kind of walk us through those?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. This is the first week. The first one is the proposed set of leases between Jefferson Davis Community College and the
city of Bruton with respect to property that is adjacent to the college's campus. And we have a brief presentation, video, that is narrated by Dr. Don Kelly, the CFO and Dean of Finance at the college. If I could get that and ask you all to just turn your chairs to see it.
This is a brief presentation to discuss the partnership between Jefferson Davis Community College and the City of Bruton, and especially the lease to lease the park area to the City of Bruton in an area where the population has been trending down for the last 10 years, and in a time where our student headcount is actually lower than it was 10 years ago, and a time when state funding is lower than it was 10 years ago. We are also faced with the elimination of the Neal Trust, which funded the park, Jefferson Davis Community College Park, for many years at a level of about $160,000 a year. This basically was eliminated, ran out in 2012, so the last 4 years we're without the funding for the park, and we've had to absorb that in the normal college budget. We have to make some tough decisions. Of course, either increase revenue or decrease expenditures. We're looking at partnerships with the city and anything else that we might could do to continue the park and handle it in a way that's most efficient for the college. We also had an employee to retire this summer, so it's an opportunity to do something a little different but maintain the quality of the park. It consists of a 3-hole golf course, a pond. You can see some bridges, and on the other side of the road, inside the park, also is the baseball field and softball field. Across the pond, you can see that the bridges are in almost disrepair. The park itself, the irrigation system is failing. It's 30 to 40 years old. It has to be replaced. So we decided not to continue maintaining the golf course as a golf course, and therefore we would not have to maintain the greens and do the irrigation, so forth. So we just cut the grass as a normal park and enjoy it as a normal park. This is a diagram of the park area, designated in yellow, and below here is the college campus, and over here is a couple of city parks nearby. Go into a map view, you can see the park and the other parks over here. There are actually 4 parks at Jefferson Davis Community College. The city-owned Jennings Park, which is probably their premier park, with walking tracks and very nice area on the main thoroughfares of Bruton. The O'Banion Park is baseball fields and so forth, and these two parks are connected via a crosswalk or a boardwalk that connects those two parks. The Wilson Park, on the other hand, is a very primitive park that has just been opened. In fact, our biology students have been down and used this park and looked for different kinds of life forms that they may be studying. There are really nice walking trails in the Jennings Park, and of course the boardwalk connecting over to O'Banion Park. There are also walking trails in the Wilson Park, but they are fairly primitive. What the city would like to do is connect these two with a bridge, and you can see the bridge connection here. The city would prefer to connect them through an upper area here, but they don't own some of this property. So this property now in yellow, the college actually owns that piece of property. So in early discussions with the city, we began to look at all our options, and we decided that it would really be neat to take the park and our walking tracks and connect it to the walking tracks from the city and have all of the walking tracks connected. It would take only this little short section here to make that happen. So in our discussions of that, the city offered to take over the maintenance of the park. They're already maintaining the area in the middle here is a cemetery, and they bring their crews over here once a week, and they could just move right into this area, and they already have the lawnmowers and all here and maintain that park. The park here designated A and B, now adjacent to the college, which is C. Would also be talking about an additional lease of these two. These three properties, 1, 2, and 3, that the college owns, that the walkway would be a part of. Parts 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are owned by the city of Bruton. 7, 8, 9, and 10 are the parks that exist with the city also. So immediately we're looking at the city cutting the grass, doing weed eating, trash removal, cleaning the walking path, maintenance of the pond, and doing whatever fence repair, just normal upkeep of the property. But in the long run, we'd like to extend this partnership and maybe be able to expand the walking trails between the two. We need new irrigation system for the ball fields that are connected to the ones that do our golf course now, which are just failing completely. Resurfacing of the road inside the park is actually a city road, and they've agreed to resurface that soon. Some other improvements that we might can do soon, one of which is the construction of an amphitheater, which is already have funds for, and already have an architect working on that project now. We'll be submitting that later. This is the golf course as it looks now. Beautiful piece of land. If you look at it from above, we are talking about this part over here is the golf course. This is a driving range, of course a baseball field and a softball field, and the college is down here. In this area would be where we were talking about adding an amphitheater. We've looked at it many times, had architects here, the city, the mayor, and so forth. You would be viewing it from this direction, and over here, late afternoon sun gives a beautiful view of the amphitheater and the pond in the background. This is the piece of land we're actually talking about. You see the pond in the background, and if you can imagine then an amphitheater sitting on that piece of property, something maybe not this fancy, but something we can use for outdoor entertainment, for movies, for class meetings, for social events, for band concerts, and so forth. And someday we'd like to do other improvements if funding was available. Lights to ball fields, clubhouses, so forth. I hope this gives you a little more information about our possible agreement with the city of Bruton.
The proposed leases with the city would be for a period of 10 years. Lease amount would be $1 per year. And the city would take over the maintenance.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And I guess this goes back to, I like lawyers that work for us, but I don't like lawyers that don't work for us. And when you've been sued by a lawyer that works for you one time, you'll understand why I'm so paranoid about this. Do we have everything in place where we're mixing facilities between the city, and I understand the purpose and the need for it, that protects us from any type liabilities, someone getting hurt if they're at the amphitheater and it's ours, or someone getting hurt on the ball field that we've leased to them. I just want to make sure all of this is in place to cover us on the liability side and for any claims of injury.
In the lease, there's an indemnity agreement in favor of college, the system, and the university.
Okay.
There's also a requirement that the city carry liability insurance similar to that it carries in other city parks.
Okay.
You feel comfortable that you've got that funded?
I trust y'all's judgment. I just want to make sure that we are covered, and because just for our liability sake. Sorry. I'm gonna ask the question regularly.
Well, and I'm here to try to answer the best I can.
I'm very impressed with that plan. That's beautiful, the way all of the parks would connect and having the city's support. Don't we all wish we had that kind of situation? That's beautiful, and Don, you did a great job putting that presentation together so that it's easy for us to understand and see the vision of what could happen down the road. I think it's wonderful. It's good.
You've got two separate leases because you've got two separate the two parcels are not contiguous.
Well, there are two separate leases.
Right.
As I understand it. The park itself is in the name of the college, titled in the name of the college.
Yes.
The adjacent properties are titled in the name of the State Board of Education.
Okay. In both of these leases, they're initially a 10-year term, no options that I pick up on. It just says to be renegotiated at the end of the 10-year term.
Yes.
And I see in here that the college pays utilities for existing structures.
As I understand
Are
it,
there
the
any?
only existing structure on the property is a utility maintenance building.
Maintenance building, yeah. Yeah. Clubhouse, okay.
Paragraph 12 in the lease agreements basically says that no one that wishes to use the property will be excluded from participation or denied benefits on many different areas, including disabilities. ADA accessibility in the park, does it comply? Is there a plan to ensure that it complies? I ask the question because those federal laws are being aggressively pursued by the federal government throughout Alabama right now. And we're opening, I presume the park is being opened up to a very broad audience that we've not had before. So I would just ask that we ensure that that is being looked at and that we're found to comply.
Sure. It does comply now.
Okay.
If we replace the bridges, we
Yeah.
have to add a walkway all the way to the bridges, and they have to
Right.
comply. So that's one of our holdups. Also, if we have the amphitheater, it's part of our architect's design to make it compliant.
Accessible.
Second, the park has been open to the city.
Has it? Okay.
Free home golf course. And one more point, there's two leases because there are two different functions. The city has agreed to do maintenance in the park. On the other property, this is merely a walking track with construction somewhere. So there's just two different purposes.
Okay.
More of a general question. One of the properties is in the name of the state school board. Does the legislation that created this board migrate titles of property to this board from the state board of education, or is that
Unfortunately,
okay?
we are working on trying to determine the best route for the transfer.
Another piece of legislation, possibly.
The Chancellor and I believe that we had a conversation with the legislator about the need to clean that up with a piece of legislation.
Well, some of the same questions that Chuck has with respect to liability and coverage and who actually owns the property and who's liable on the property, I think all that is keenly intertwined with this issue.
We run into this every board.
Appreciate that. Other questions?
Move on to the next one.
The next one is the request to continue a lease between Gaston State Community College and the city of Gaston. It's a piece of property located on the Gaston campus that has been used as soccer fields by the city going back at least 10 years. The current lease expires on December 31, 2015. the proposed lease would be for a period of 10 years.
Can you explain the termination clause?
Which paragraph?
In the description, there was a statement that the college could terminate the clause or the lease in 90 days, and I was looking for it in the agreement.
Paragraph 11.
One question on here with that comment on the termination. It mentions in there about being able to reuse the field for baseball if the facility comes back. Is the city agreeing to maintain it at a level of play for college, or there's different levels of lighting for high school, for, American Legion, for college? And if it's not maintained at that level, we will have to, if we go back to baseball, I don't want to have to re-spend money to keep the facility to where it is now.
We'll certainly check into that.
Thank you.
Could I speak to that?
Yes.
Our baseball field is currently not up to baseball.
Okay.
It's one of the reasons that one of our previous presidents chose to close the baseball program. I did, the first 2 or 3 months of the interim presidency, did talk and had the field managers and bring in there and come up with our fields. Because if we wanted to reinstitute land, we would have to do some work with lighting and irrigation the field and actually bring some dirt in and rework the infield and stands and so forth. And I was told that my Chevy version would be about $500,000. And it was one of the reasons I agreed to include it into the lease, because our field is currently not up to collegiate level play. I think they'll use it as a practice field and it will be maintained in its current state. But if we were to reinstitute baseball, then we would have to come in and do quite a bit of work with the lighting, the electric box, and just the condition of our field.
Thank you.
Good?
Okay. Moving on to the next one. It is at Gaston State as well. This is the request to amend a current lease only with respect to the lease amount and certain square footage. It is a lease with the Department of Labor, primarily on the college's Valley Street campus. It is for a Job Corps center. We're in the 5th year of a 20-year lease. Under the terms of the lease that was entered into in 2010, every 5 years, an appraisal is to be conducted with respect to the rented property for the determination of market value with respect to the rental. That was done in 2015. The net result of that appraisal resulted in a slight increase in the annual rental, coupled with the Department of Labor gave up approximately 2,000 square feet in space. So we are receiving additional rental for less space. And again, this is simply to amend the amount of the annual rental.
Just as a point of clarification before our November meeting, how about changing the rationale and remove the word interim?
Yes, sir. Will do.
Thank you.
I did want to provide the board with at least a few moments to ask Dr. Morente any questions or points of clarification with reference to again, his excellent talk. And I know we covered a lot of ground, and I think you probably heard at the beginning of our meeting that there will be we will make available to you his talk. And so portions of it could certainly be reviewed, but you may have some questions that you jotted down during his presentation that you'd like to ask him now, and we certainly want to take the best advantage we can of his expertise.
Dr. Morante, I just want to once again thank you for your presence here and for your presentation. Any additional suggestions that would be helpful for us coordinating with K-12 would be appreciated. And if you want to hit some of the high points, and I think they were in this presentation, but I think that's one of the key, that relationship's going to be key in us making some progress, as well as all what the task force decides that the two-year system needs to do to reduce our remediation rate and to help these unprepared students. But I think that our relationship coordinating and collaboration with K-12 is going to be very important, and also tasking K-12 with the challenges that they're faced with, and doing a better job of moving on, feeding our institutions with prepared students.
I'm not sure I could add much in terms of different ideas to maybe reinforce it, but a couple of things maybe. Well, number one, you're in it together, as you're indicating by your question, and that's essential. And I think you're in a somewhat difficult political decision being made by the governor to pull your board from there, and that may cause some tension. And so to overcome that and recognize that you all care about students is essential. The second thing is sometimes people in higher education tend to think of themselves as higher because the adjective is there. And back to you're in this together, sharing is very important. And that means at all levels, including the faculty aligning the curriculum, working together. The notion that college faculty know best and therefore expect the high school people to do what the college faculty is counterproductive for cooperation and communication. Not blaming anybody. You know, there's a very old joke about the college is blaming the high schools blaming the middle schools blaming the elementary. Okay, the bottom line is, and I figured this out years ago, and it's a terrible joke, it's really the in-laws that caused this difficulty.
This starts at preschool. You know, the president is pushing for early education for all 4-year-olds. And that people can go back and make things about nutrition and effective health conditions and food and all that. I mean, this is a societal problem, and it's not going to go away easily. And all levels need to work together. There's enough work to do without fighting, that's for sure. I think if you look at the things that I said in there, there are some very specific things that colleges are working at. The state of Texas in the Houston area gave a major grant to community colleges to work on this. And the issues that they've worked on, I was going to say worked through, but worked through implies they completed, are complicated. You have change in superintendents, you have change in principals, you have change in faculty, you have change in presidents. And a lot of times when the leadership changes, it's almost like you have to start over again. Getting the faculty involved at both levels, absolutely essential. But the support of the principal, the superintendent, the boards, very helpful. One of the things to consider is not only the concept at the state level, but maybe encourage, the board can encourage the local colleges, but the local colleges probably know best what's going on at the local districts and the local high schools. And sharing that information without dictating to them how to do this. Here's what we'd like to work on. We'd like to improve the curriculum alignment, et cetera. We'd like to decrease the students who are not reaching acceptable levels. And the ACT provides a great way of doing it. You don't have to reinvent that wheel. And letting the local districts come up at it and then share together what the results are. You know, Alabama's not that big a state that you could start looking at it. And the local colleges have enough to do with their own colleges to expect everything to change there. So without local cooperation and participation, communication, it's not going to happen except in isolated places. And where it happens, demonstrate that, show that, let other people know. Here's what's happening, and let different flowers bloom. So
Thank you for that. One thing I can add is that I've seen nothing but a spirit of cooperation from our chancellor and his staff in regard to this issue. So I think we're in the right. I think we have the right spirit.
I doubt you would have asked me to come and pay me the money you're paying me if that weren't true. Right. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Have you heard of any K through 12 institutions that make it mandatory to have parent-teacher conference once a quarter, semester?
You know, there are times when consultants need to draw the lines on what they know and what they don't know. And I'm not an expert on K to 12 and what should be doing. But it is tradition to have parent-teacher conferences from kindergarten through high school annually. I just know that as a parent, as a grandfather. You know, my son and daughter-in-law kind of gave us an overview of how their 2 kids were doing just last week, as a matter of fact. So mandatory regulation, I don't know about, but it's tradition that in any educational system I've been involved with, it's customary. Let me just say it's customary.
Customary. I know of some school districts that are excelling right now, and they actually have mandatory parent-teacher conference.
It may well be that in districts that parents don't show up, that's one of the things to look at. But then you'd have to look at, how do you change a district? And frequently the schools, the churches, the community agencies, you can bring in social groups like the Rotary, the Lions Club. How do you, business people, as I said to somebody earlier at lunch, the business people are usually the ones most interested in improving standards and skills, because you guys have to hire the graduates of high schools and colleges. And so business people frequently are wonderful to take a leadership role, and I suspect that the governor needs a congratulations for appointing so many people, business people, to the board, because in a sense, what you lack in perhaps understanding the details is wonderful, because you let other people solve the problems. You just want to see the outcomes and set policy. And so that helps to avoid boards dictating to everybody what should be doing, what should be done. people at the colleges and at the high schools have a pretty good idea of the issues. They need some incentives, some reinforcements, frequently resources, additional resources to help to do this. So I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions for Dr. Morante?
I do have a request. If you all could watch the game tonight, root for the New York Mets, I'd appreciate it. Even I know Chicago hasn't won since 1904. So.
And the incentive is?
The incentive is it'll make me feel great. I can't go beyond that, sir.
Very good. Thank you again. We appreciate your answers and appreciate your presentation today very much.
Thank you.
Just a little background on this next item. And I think, I know I've spoken with some of you individually and maybe all of you about this. We have had a number of teams, a number of committees working for the last 18 to 24 months on policy revision. And this is a monumental task. And as I said, we've had many very able individuals doing an excellent job in working through that. And ultimately, of course, those policies will come to you for review and approval. During this last legislative session, I think you were aware of the fact that the bill that would have appointed a new board of trustees, the first bill, included a section on regionalization. And that generated a number of questions. While that was floating out there, one of our committees was beginning to look at the policy that addresses mergers and consolidations. And this is and then there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion around this particular policy. And it's very important to me that the board understands what's involved when it comes to mergers and consolidations. And this is, there are more moving parts than I can even describe because of the nature of colleges and the various entities they serve. And so I've asked Roger Bates if he would take a few minutes and may take more than a few minutes to walk you through the policy, I guess, as it's on the book, and there is a copy of that in your folder. But also talk about the interplay, I guess maybe that's the approach, between the various agencies, each of whom would have a role in any kind of merger or consolidation. So if Roger, if you would kind of take us through that process and help lead us in a discussion, I would appreciate it. You want to just come on up here to that microphone? Great.
I thought that maybe the best way for us to engage this conversation first and foremost would be to gain some understanding and appreciation for how this has been done in the past and what are the drivers and what are the various sets of standards, applications of guidelines from the various people and authorities that have a play in these kinds of decisions. I went back and looked in preparation for this, and I don't know whether the chancellor chose me to have this conversation because I was the largest, oldest person in his office who's been around the 2-year system or what, but I did go back and look, and we've done this before. I didn't realize how many times we've done it. I can't find anybody in the system who worked with me on any of these, so I feel a little bit like a lone soldier. The preparation of the policy that you've got in front of you for consideration, Susan Price and I collaborated on that in the last few weeks as we contemplated how to bring this issue out for you, somewhat at your request, but also with a charge of looking at this very serious issue. But over the last, and I'll say dating back to 1985, the last one, 2003, but between 85 and 2003, the system was fairly active with regard to consolidations, mergers, name changes. One of the big items of bringing technical colleges with the what we used to call junior colleges, but the academic side of the house, was in large measure one of the things that was going on during that period. And you have done, your predecessors have been involved in these 18 different times during that time period. One of the things that makes this process somewhat cumbersome for you, but certainly very detailed, is that as a Board of Trustees and the State Board of Education before you did not have the unilateral authority to simply decide that you would do a consolidation. That authority rests with you, certainly, but it also spans to the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, or AIC, as we oftentimes refer to it around here. And there is some very distinct and detailed process that is required of us as a two-year system to prepare for and present those desires and resolutions or motions from you to achieve those kinds of results. What you have additionally to the policy in your packet of information, I chose to include one item as opposed to all three of these, and I'll just show you these, and if anybody would desire this bedtime reading, I'll be happy to provide it. SACS, the Commission on Colleges, has very distinct guidelines for substantive change for accredited institutions. Feel free to read it. It also has very particularized guidelines dealing with mergers and consolidations, which are, by definition, a substantive change under SACS accreditation standards. So when we are dealing with one of our institutions that is a SACS accredited institution, and we're going to have a substantive change for that institution, meaning adding a site, adding a program, then a substantive change application has to go into SACS, and a merger being one of those, all of these materials must be followed. That's one piece. The second piece is what you have in your book, which is the Alabama Administrative Code provisions that outline what the Alabama Commission of Higher Education has codified in the Alabama Administrative Procedures Act of our process. You will note inside that booklet that contains that particular set of rules, and let me just make sure so that you all know how to read what you have. If you look at the first page of the Administrative Code provision that I gave you, you'll see that this is out of the 300 series of the Administrative Code dealing with the Alabama Commission of Higher Education. The one that we are talking about today is the very last one, which is .09. The rest of those sections I discussed with Adrian, and between the two of us, we decided that you did not need 1,000 pages of paper for those previous 8 sections of the Administrative Code, so we spared you the size of that notebook. So .09 are the guidelines that AIC follows for the review and approval of consolidation and mergers of our two-year institutions. Embedded within that Administrative Code provision is the direct quotation of the policy for consolidation and mergers passed by the Alabama State Board of Education. Now, why is that important to you? It's important to you because in the previous board policy on this subject, which was Board Policy 102.07, that board policy essentially tracks word for word the resolution and these rules that are in the Alabama Administrative Code. As the Board of Trustees of the two-year college system, it's not within your power or your authority to change the administrative code
that applies to another agency of state government. So if you look at this administrative code provision and you were to say to yourselves, we don't like it, we don't want to follow that, we want to do something else, two things would have to happen. One is we would have to go to AIC and deal with an administrative code change process. Secondly, any proposed procedural change that you would want to make would have to be measured against the SAC standards to determine whether or not the code provisions that you were trying to change met SAC's accreditation standards. So there's two things at play there. Thus, in order for us to be able to efficiently move forward with consideration of any mergers or consolidations that you might desire to take a look at, it seemed appropriate that we do not have to, with this board, to restate policy 102.07 in its entirety, but rather to simply give you the simple policy you have in front of you, which is that you will approach consolidation and merger consistent with the Alabama Administrative Code that applies to AIC, which already has those rules in it, and we know already comply with SAC standards and guidelines, so that we don't have to attempt to redraft or draw specific provisions of our own policy to meet and match those standards. So procedurally, that's sort of the body of law, that's the body of regulation that when you make a decision along these lines, your directive will be to the chancellor to accept either a recommendation from him or a directive to him to cause something of this nature to occur. I am certain as I sit in this chair that he would very quickly turn to those of us who have been down this road and say, now go to it. And all of these things would be what we would turn to for our guidance. These would be the processes, these would be the standards, these would be the requirements that we would have to fulfill with regard to the evaluation and presentation of any consolidation or merger within the two-year college system. And I say that because it is highly unlikely at this point. We only have just a few technical schools left that aren't already SACS accredited. And in all likelihood, if there were to be a roll-up of any magnitude, those non-accredited, SACS accredited institutions, while they may be COE accredited, they would most certainly be combined with a SACS accredited institution. So we would wind up as that college being the leading institution in the consolidation, needing to follow those provisions and those guidelines in any event. So what we've given to you in this policy, I believe, is a very streamlined policy for you for this particular purpose. And if I could have one moment of privilege with a parenthetical, in the absence of complete policies, and I know you all have talked about that, there are many things within the policies, particularly the 100 and the 600 series, but also some things in the financial area that we will need to look at together to make a complete package for SACS compliance. So while we've been kicking the can on policy down the road a little, once we engage this area of activity, we will need to pump up our efforts on dealing with our policies and procedures so that we can make certain that any movement in this area will be compliant with both the AIC regulations and the SAC standards that would govern any such activity. So that was my high horse. I'll get off of that one. We'll come back to policies when y'all are ready, but just know they're very, very important as you look at the merger and consolidation process. I have been asked by one or two of you as we have gotten ready to talk about this subject about timeline and how does all this work. And as a thumbnail of that timeline, let me explain it this way. Before any action can be taken to pursue mergers and consolidation, there must first be a recognition of initiation of that process by this board with the chancellor. Once that happens, then we move into a different section of this process, which is by working with the institutions, develop a more profound and detailed statement of intent to consolidate and merge, which takes some time to get that to you. SAC's latest pronouncement on all of this is that they need advance notice of any consolidation a minimum of 6 months in advance. So if you were to vote today to do or initiate a merger, we would need to give SACS at least 6 months' notice before we could complete it. The more likely timeline for the completion of one of these, which is your duty and your right to finally approve, is more along the lines of 9 to 12 months before it'll be back to you for a final vote of approval. So what do you do during the interim process? You'll note within these rules, the ones that I provided you, that there is a reference in them to do 2 different types of consolidation. One is referenced as an administrative consolidation phase, and one is referenced as the statement of intent phase. It has been our experience, and I would suggest to you that it will be part of any planned protocol that we'll follow here, that if you choose to pursue a consolidation or merger, that we would initially have an administrative consolidation of the operational and functional responsibility of the planned merged institutions, meaning that you would select from the merged institutions one who will be the leading institution for the consolidation. And it would be that president and that college's responsibility to then assume administrative responsibilities for the other institution or institutions, if it's more than one, in the case of some regional effort, to essentially be the lead institution administratively during the merger preparation phase. Now, for those of you who've been in business, you know how that works. Ordinarily, what you have is you have, in the first instance, you would have a statement of intent to merge, which in most instances would put a CEO, CFO, COO responsible for day-to-day management of the intended target of that merger until such time as the definitive agreement of merger is actually executed and implemented. It's no different here. Essentially, you would run off the books of the merged institutions during this administrative phase. They would be kept separately. They would have still a program institutional effort at their local level, but they would be administered functionally and operationally by one set of administrative staff. So we would look to implement the administrative consolidation phase as soon as we could after a decision that you would make, and then during the succeeding next several months, all of the detailed documents that include the statement of intent to merge, the proxy that has to go to SACS. SACS will then send a team in to the college itself to work with the staff, work with faculty, to check all the boxes that are laid out in this administrative code section that I've given you, until they reach a point that they're satisfied that it is a valid and good merger that is intended to benefit the students, that there are financial benefits to the merger itself. And so there will be a lot of eyes looking at all of this. Initially, AIC would approve that merger. It would come back to you for final vote of approval of the merger once SACS and AIC have all essentially said their graces over your process. So I would expect us to be, if you started in the next month or so down this road, you're probably going to be in the springtime before we get Department of Education notifications prepared and ready. That's a critical component of all this, as you might understand, because that's where all of your student financial aid flows from. And that's very, very important that we get Department of Education sign off during this intent and implementation process, in addition to the SACS review and the presentations to AIC. All that to say that when you say go, there are people in this room, and maybe some who aren't in this room, who are going to be given a very, very heavy labor-intensive task. I didn't bring them. I started to bring them because I just wanted to show you some of my notebooks from the previous mergers. Just take my word for it. They're about that thick. And the documentation that goes with these applications for change, substantive change to SACS, are tremendously detailed. They will require a very detailed assessment of programs of instruction at all of the institutions. The goal and idea being to find, seek, and eliminate where possible any duplication of programs. They will look at staffing and staffing patterns and whether or not you are setting the new institution up under a good workable model. So a lot of evaluation will go into the staffing patterns that go into those institutions. And obviously, physical assets and human resource assets are very important things that will have to be looked at, along with library facilities. And if you can just think in your mind all of the various things that you've seen on this campus today, each and every department and function of that responsibility of college administration will be put under a microscope for us when we start down that path. So I guess, Chancellor, for those who have not ever done one of these, I guess my purpose is to make sure that we have a realistic view and understanding of what all will be required here, a timeline under which this can occur, and certainly to recognize that when we say go, it is going to be a very time and human resource intense effort on the part of the institutions that are involved, and we need to be prepared as we go forward with that. It should come as no surprise to any of us, but you all from business will know that anytime you merge 3 or 2 operating units, they're not on the same technology platforms. We're going to have tremendous challenges in the area of technology as we merge our financial reporting, accounting, student financial aid services, all of those things, schedules, registration, everything that goes into the administrative side of the school. So as we go down that path, and it is a noble path, and it is one which I think we all feel some sense of charge to take a look at. We have a lot of work to do in front of us, and I'll just simply say that it's going to take all the folks and resources we've got on hand and probably a few more as we get ready to go down that path. But I think that there's a will, and I think there's an ability to accomplish that task. And my only commitment to you is if I don't die between now and the end of this, maybe we'll have 19 or 20 when we add to this list of projects that we've completed. So that's sort of the 40,000-foot view of all this without getting into the weeds of all of it. But I'm happy to entertain your questions and try to help you understand even better how this process is going to work. Mr. Chairman, if you've got any further questions.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it. You did a great job, I think, spelling out the kind of the intricacies of this process, and there are many. So, questions?
Chancellor, if I might, the language in here that talks about the State Board of Education, is that going to be another procedural issue? Or?
I don't think so with regard to this particular matter for this reason. The authorizing resolution of the Act 125 that created your board had one provision in it that I found that I thought, unlike real estate, which everybody understands is a title and land law specific issue, the provision in the code that they did give us said this: all references in state law to the Department of Post-Secondary Education, Alabama Community College System, or terms of like import shall be deemed to refer to the Alabama Community College System. That's in 1660.110.1, and it's my belief that that provision in and of itself, with regard to this procedural matter, that's a matter of Alabama administrative code, therefore carries equal weight of law, would be subsumed within that provision. So I think we're okay.
I'll repeat what a boss of mine told me one time. What are you planning on doing on nights and weekends? So.
Well, I've decided that maybe I should go ahead and take vacation now before you all vote on one of these, because there may not be any for a long time once we start down that road. But you know, it'll be a privilege to work with you on it, and it'll be, I think, good work in the end.
Any other questions?
One other question, and I've had this asked by other board members. Can someone send us the link to get to the policies and procedures manual, and how to get to them electronically?
Well, I can tell you, they're on the community college system website.
Yeah,
If you print them off, buy you a big stack of paper.
I have.
It's a large.
It's a 3-week binder about this topic.
It's huge. They're in PDF and Word format on the community college system website. There's two things on there though. There's a set of policies and then there's a set of guidelines. So you need both to put those things together. So that you all might be informed of this, I don't know to what extent you've actually discussed it. The way we're sort of functioning, operating for right now, in the absence of having adopted that entire stack of all those policies, is that we're using those with an eye towards pattern and practice of what's gone before, trying to be careful not to refer to them as your policies, certainly until you have approved them. However, most of those policies were developed in the wake of the Schubert consent decree, which may mean nothing to you, but they drowned us in policy after a federal institutional reform litigation that had to do with employment practices in the two-year college system. And so most of that came out of that process, particularly as they relate to the human resources area. So we're trying to be careful to use that as pattern and practice, but not the gospel, according to your board, because we knew that your board did not desire to have all those policies pinned on you. So we've been using those essentially as guidelines to make sure that at least until we get there and you have your own policies, that those things are providing us a basis on which to guide the presidents and human resource directors at the colleges so that we don't have a discriminatory, application of those rules from one college to the next, so that we're not inconsistent in the way we've been handling personnel issues. But Chuck, I'm sure you know there's far more in those policies than just HR issues, the governance section and several others. So if I could encourage you gently to let us get on with that process, we would appreciate that. Those of us who are working both legally and out in the field, I think the presidents would certainly appreciate that, to give them some certainty and definition. And I'll quit talking, but here's just a little bitty example. As we stand today, we've not formally and officially adopted an EEOC statement as a part of our board policies, and we haven't had one since you all were seated. So if we get a Title VII discrimination claim and the investigative officer should say, where's your standard EEOC policy? Honestly, we don't have one. We have what has been given to us from prior work of the board. We have obviously the one that would be universally applicable to the state of Alabama, but this board doesn't have that statement for itself. Thus, things like what we did last month with the conflict of interest statement, if you'll recall, with the substantive change for governance that we had needed to submit to AIC. There are all kinds of little patchwork issues like that embedded within the policies. And just to echo the Chancellor's statement a while ago, a lot of work was done shortly before you all were seated, a period of about 18 months, by various policy committees. And I think we can bring these to you or some subset of committee from you for review before you actually have presented them to your full board at your choosing, Mr. Chairman. And I think you'll find that a lot of work has gone into those to actually curtail and remove some of the friction and impediments that people felt existed within some of those previous policies. So happy to work on that project with you when you're ready. I'm just sort of encouraging you. Get ready a little, when you can.
Mr. Chancellor. Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I've talked to Dr. Hoff about this, and we're going to have a meeting shortly. But until then, all requests for funding, what I would recommend to this Board of Trustees is that we're able to see all of the grading from all the different sources. Because there's one set of grading that ranks 0 to 5, with 5 being the highest. There's another one that ranks 0 to 5, with 0 and 1 being the highest. And then there's another one that ranks 0 to 100. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But we need to see all of the rankings, not just one, moving forward until we can come up with a solution for that. And that starts at the bottom of the regions, the 10 regions, all the way to the top to this board for approval. There's different scenarios.
And I agree, and what you're saying, it's not just within the system office, you're talking about the kind of the relationship among the agencies.
Yes.
And we can do that. We can do that. Thank you. Questions? Anything?
I just wanted to pose, I guess, an example just so I can make sure that I fully understand. Chancellor, if you recommend that a consolidation or merger takes place, then since that would naturally probably be a sensitive situation because of all of the colleges that are involved, then we would vote as a group of trustees. And does it require unanimous consent, or would that be just 5 to 4, or how would that play out?
It's a good question.
Well, under your current operating rules, a majority vote would carry the day on that. So if you chose to place a higher burden of vote on that, you would have to do that as a board to reach a higher threshold. If you wanted it to be a 3/4 majority versus a simple majority, that would be something the board would need to address in its own policies. But your first question was, it would happen with the chancellor's recommendation, but your vote. In other words, he would need this board's approval to initiate a merger or consolidation. He could not just do that on his own. I would hope he would know if he had some votes somewhere.
Pretty careful about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
That's a good
wouldn't want to
question.
be at this same microphone listening to that
No.
if I didn't know.
No, that is a good question. Other questions?
Well, thank y'all very much, and I wish
Thank you,
the best
Roger.
luck with it.
That's a good job. Mr. Chairman, that's my list.
Thank you again, Roger, for the concise way that you covered all that and clear way that you did. Any other comments from the trustees? Anything else for this work session? Well, thank you for everybody's participation. Once again, thank you, Dr. Ward, for the hospitality, and for your faculty and staff. Their great hospitality here at Lawson State. And Chancellor, thank you for your idea for us to meet on the campuses, and for your leadership. Thank you very much for that. Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Please.
They're the ones that do all the work, and make all the things happen. Ms. Cruz is Chief Financial Officer here at the college. We have been here for a number of years. Both Secretary Dr. Crawford, Bruce Crawford, been about 14 months with the department, and has since come back home. Thank you all very much. And Dr. Meredith Green, who still, she's assistant president, does a lot with SAC and takes care of a lot of their office things. Chris McGee is this committee, she's director of HR here at the college, been here a couple of years. A number of other staff who were over at lunch, but they're the ones, chairman and members of the board and chancellor, who really make the college work and get things done. So I just wanted to recognize them and thank them for an outstanding job. Raise your hand there, instructors who are here, and Danielle Pierce has been here taking and all, but a number of people, and I'll just pass it on, your appreciation for hosting the board. We certainly appreciate it, enjoy y'all being here. Come back anytime, the door and the lights
That's
on.
great. That's great. And thanks to all the trustees for your attendance and for your great participation and engagement in the system. We've got great things ahead of us. Anything else from anybody? If not, we'll stand adjourned.